Welcome to On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin at Ms. Magazine, a show where we report, rebel, and tell it like it is. On this show, we center your concerns about rebuilding our nation and advancing the promise of equality. Join me as we tackle the most compelling issues of our times. On our show, History Matters, we examine the past as we pivot to the future. Now, on today's show, we focus on rebuilding America, a woman's economy. The COVID 19 pandemic has had an undeniably negative impact on our economy. It's clear that this impact has been most deeply felt by women, particularly women of color. Let's face it, women have lost more than 5.5 million jobs since the beginning of COVID. It's been that 1, 2, 3 punch that the New York Times has talked about recently. It's women who are working moms, women who are taking care of others, it's women who are working in government. And all of this leads to the question, how important is it that women know their worth? There's so many questions for us to unpack in today's episode, and joining me today to help us sort out these issues and to answer your questions are Sandra Finley. She is the president and CEO of the League of Black Women, a national organization that provides strategic leadership research to communicate the collective voices of Black women, sustaining joyful living in families, communities, and workplaces. I'm also joined by Dr. Patricia Jones-Blessman. She's a licensed clinical psychologist with over 3 decades of experience as a clinician and administrator of mental health programs. Dr. Jones was the founder and president of the Institute for Psychodiagnostic Interventions and Services, one of only a few minority-owned private sector psychological service corporations nationwide. I'm also joined by Jennifer Justice, or JJ. She is an entertainment and live experience executive known for her expertise in building artists' careers and business portfolios by marrying art with commerce. In 2019, she founded the Justice Department, a management, strategy, and legal firm that works with women and woke men, entrepreneurs, executives, talent to build and maximize their value. Finally, I'm joined by Rachel Payne. She is the managing director, head of innovation and technology at Full Cycle, and a technology executive, entrepreneur, investor, inventor, and philanthropist. She is the CEO of Fem Inc. and a former executive at Google. She is a startup mentor for tech starts and at the University of California, Berkeley's Blockchain Accelerator. I'm so happy to be joined by these fabulous guests. Patricia, I want to start with you. You were on the board of the Family Defense Center, the mission of which was to advocate justice for families in the child welfare system. You also have over 30 years of experience as a licensed clinical psychologist. Can you tell us about what these times mean for families that are experiencing COVID but can't leave the house, both for women and also for the children?
Well, one of the first issues connecting the pandemic to violence is the stay-at-home orders. We know that at any times when, like during the holidays or whenever vacations, whenever families are spending more time together, that those are usually times when you see an uptick in the amount of domestic violence that gets experienced. So whether it's due to a quarantine or working from home, families are basically essentially stuck at home together in a relatively small area. And this can create sort of a perfect storm or petri dish for increased violence. Globally, we know that, or we've seen an uptick in reporting. It used to be that 1 in 3 women would report some incidents of physical abuse or some harassment. And now globally, it seems like it's 1 in 2 worldwide. Interestingly, the amount of reported intimate partner violence has actually decreased. But we suspect that that may be due to the inability to, some of the barriers to actually reporting it. Because if you're stuck together in a house in a relatively small area, then there's not enough privacy to be able to make that kind of phone call. And so we're concerned about that. And some of the reason we're concerned about that is because the number of murder suicides where the person the receiver of violence usually has been killed along with the person who usually perpetrates it. So we see a steep increase in the murder-suicide rate. We know that travel restrictions can impose or impact escape or safety plans, and that and reasonably so, there's a fear of entering a shelter because of the potential exposure to COVID.
So
So,
these are some significant challenges then that women are facing during COVID who are at home. And to be clear, this crosses the socioeconomic spectrum, isn't that right?
correct. We know that domestic violence impacts women or hits women of all socioeconomic statuses. So, rich, poor, doesn't matter. We know that women across the board are impacted by that.
And isn't it true then that the abusive situations that you speak to, they affect women in the household, but they also affect children too? And I know that you are and have been an incredibly significant psychologist in relation to matters that affect families and that also affect children. What are some of the concerns there that mothers, women, aunts, grandmothers have to be concerned about?
Well, first of all, children, I've spent a large part of my career working with children who have been sexually abused or physically abused in their homes. And so the pandemic creates a situation where children are not, because they're not able to go to school and not able to go visit perhaps the auntie or the grandmother or the play mom or the other a safe person that they might talk to let them know what's going on with them or school or even just to go to school, that they are more at risk, and this is a much more dangerous time for them. There was a case here. I mean, it has gotten extreme. There was a case here in Chicago where a child was on in class, in a Zoom class, and the abuser wanted her to had her engage in oral sex in front of her. It was recorded on a Zoom class. Presumably, the abuser didn't know that was what was happening. But those are the kinds of things that children can be exposed to, or that can be happening to children unbeknownst to us. Um,
And in that case, there are other kids then who also then saw that and traumatized by that as well.
exactly. Because they watched it or they saw it, and not knowing that, well, knowing that their classmate went through that experience. Of course, because whether that was a godsend or a lucky thing that it happened to be caught, we were able to. There was on tape that we were able to catch the perpetrator and bring some justice for that child. But not every child is going to be in that kind of situation. Not every child is going to have the ability to be able to report what's going on and to document what's happening to them.
And in situations like that, what's the recommendation? So as a psychologist, are there places that children can turn to that you recommend and that women can turn to that you recommend just for our listeners?
But we also know that abusers will try to keep them socially isolated, and um, I know that this is going to be challenging, but finding creative ways to find some privacy and some space to be able to reach out to either a hotline or someone that's trusted in their community, somebody that they feel comfortable talking to, that it becomes even vitally important to have check-ins or wellness checks with your village, with the people around you that you're close to. Women, I know that there's a Facebook post that was going around where it's, if you said certain keywords, that your girlfriends knew that something was going on and to check in on you and to come by or to stop by. So people have had to get very creative about how we're going to keep our sisters and our children safe during this time.
I'm so glad that you raised that because the reality is that a lot of women put the mask on every day, right along with their makeup, and domestic violence is a real issue. Economic violence happens to be a real issue, and sometimes there are women that are encountering both, and it's across the socioeconomic spectrum. And sometimes it's even women who are in college, who are in medical school, or who are in law school. So just know that we hear you and that we see you. Sandra, I'd like to turn to you because the concerns of economic violence are ones that you and your organization spend time thinking about. And these are important issues to consider when we're talking about rebuilding an economy and an economy that includes women. So, how do we go about doing that?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation to be with you, Dr. Goodwin. I want to follow a little bit of what Patricia was talking about. She talked about the situation inside of homes that are under stress and distress, and what the Black women's economic agenda does. We call her Black womanomics, so you know. So what she does is she looks at the larger society and she asks the question whether or not the larger society is supportive of an idea of Black women living well. If it is not, then the stress is just kind of compress on down, and then start to become the stories of the unfortunate stories of our lives. So
And can you just tell, there's a distinction that you brought in there
Mhm.
because you said living well. And so
Mhm.
that's not just living. So unpack that just a little bit, the difference between just living and living well.
Oh, it's my most fun thing to do. One of the pillars of the Black womanomics economic agenda is called joyful living. Now, we took a look when we started this work at how Black women were living and determined, as you already know, we are under considerable stress, unending stress from all sorts of forces, and found out that modern Black women, well, they can do everything. We're doing everything under undue and growing amounts of stress and distress. And what we were asking about, so how's it going? How are you living? And they say something like, I'm blessed and highly favored. We say, well, we know.
It looks like those billboards on the side of churches.
is what we would say while we were still enduring, the hardship. But to your point, we did a little bit more focus group work to determine what Black women were thinking about when they thought about living good lives. And it was mostly situational responses, that is situational happiness. I had a break, I went to the hairstylist, I saw my family, I blah, 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 something that was about an occasion. And we determined that what needed to be the anchor of the Black women's economic agenda was joyful living. And that is a living status wherein everything in the society supports the probability that you will live in a joyful state. It is not something that you occasionally will reach for, something that will happen to you like the lottery number. It is just the general state of well-being, and that a society would be intentional with promoting and supporting the idea that we would have that. So that is generally what we call joyful living. And we ask Black women to get a handle on joyful living and know that it's an internal barometer that will let you know quickly whether or not something going on the outside is not promoting a likelihood that you will have a joyful life. Now you can get to the specific things, the inequities in pay, the difficulties in living well in specific neighborhoods, the difficulties in getting promotions, the difficulties in being respected for the power of your office. All of those are the things around it, but they are generally supported by a larger society that attacks you through its economic weapons and essentially says that you are not entitled to the blessings of liberty.
So I'm wondering how during this period of COVID, we are to come out of this for women and an economic agenda because women have disproportionately suffered through the pandemic in terms of job related losses. Women have lost over 5 million jobs. In fact, about 5.5 million jobs is the estimate. And that accounts for a significant percentage of overall job loss just since this crisis. And I want to turn to you, Rachel, and helping us to think about that, because you're an economic leader. You've built businesses and firms. You've sold businesses and firms. You were one of the early women at Google and leading out generally within the space of tech. So how are you processing what this time means for women and job loss? What do we do with this? How do we understand it?
There have been so many gains women have made in all fields, and this pandemic has set us back generationally. We're talking about, women who have, from all levels, who have now suddenly taken on full-time responsibility for educating their children at home and managing the stress of trying to accommodate what everyone needs while everyone is trying to work virtually. And that's for people who have internet access. So this is a situation where women are bearing undue stress and are suffering both in their work performance, because it's very difficult, as you said, to concentrate, but they're suffering very directly because they're concentrated in the industries that are seeing the most losses. So while women make up about 40% of the labor force, their job losses are 54% of the lost jobs so far. And so this is a disproportionate impact. We're talking about small business owners, light manufacturing, industries like service industries, where they've been completely shut down. This is not like 2008, where a lot of the job losses happened in manufacturing sectors and areas of the economy that were dominated by men. And what we're seeing very clearly is that there's a pain point that has been persistent in this country, not just the lack of healthcare system that works, but importantly, lack of access to affordable, safe, and high quality childcare. And now when we talk about child support at home, we're not getting the kind of resources that are actually relevant and necessary to support those people in the family who are actually burdened with trying to maintain their status as an income earner, whatever that means in today's world. But they're also trying to make sure that their families are taken care of. Now, add to that complexity the large percentage of families that have a single parent, most likely a single mom.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a single parent household. My mother worked 2 jobs minimum to take care of us and to do what she could to provide the maximum positive care for us. But she was gone a lot because she was working. And I think about the single parent households who have to make the hardest choice of all. Do I work? Do I take care of my children? How do I put food on the table? How do I make rent? And then we have a Senate who's literally missing in action. They go on recess when we have a bill passed in the House, and really we're at an impasse on
the HEROES Act you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that could help families who are struggling right now. And no, they're on recess, and they don't really seem to care that this is a situation that has really bottomed out.
So what you're suggesting is that this could all be different. We could have a HEROES Act that's passed. We could have a better society altogether. And this brings me to wanting to turn to you, JJ, because of your work. You spent 17 years as the attorney for Jay-Z. You've been in an industry just like with Rachel, where the patriarchy actually dominates and rules. Rachel, you with the tech industry, and then JJ, you, the music industry, and working with music moguls, as they say. But these are places where it's just been hostile for women in a lot of ways. And so I'm wondering, how have you not only coped, but how you've also thrived in those spaces when there are others that would say, I don't know if I could make it. I don't know if I could do it.
I think the short answer to that, and I only have now hindsight in that, is I'm not sure if I did. I think that I eventually hit a glass ceiling, and I started really analyzing what it was that was preventing me from even going further and further up. And the numbers will show still in the music industry that there is a very, very, very small percentage of women at the top. And there still has never been a woman that is at the top, right? they're always answering to a man above. And so, yes, I did well. I was a student of it. I was a student of, listening to men in conference rooms and seeing how they did business, which led me to what I'm doing now. But, ultimately the imposter syndrome, I think, got actually worse the older, and the more experienced and higher up I got, because I was like, I'm never going to be part of this crew. It doesn't matter. And I'm not, I'm not talking about a particular person or man or anybody that I worked for. It's just in general, like it could be the people like that we were having meetings with. Like I was having two different conversations every time I was in a conference room. One was, what the subject matter was at hand. And the other was an internal one going like, oh my God, did they literally just talk over me? Are they asking my junior male colleague that reports to me? Are they, addressing him more than me? And that's why I really was like, okay, the patriarchy does not serve me. It is not meant for me. It's not meant for women in general. It's not meant for anybody who is not written in the Constitution or thought of in the Constitution, really is what it is. And, and like, how can I switch this? Which is why I started the Justice Department and started focusing, instead of like knocking on the door of the patriarchy and getting approval, going, you know what, let's all build our own economy, the matriarchy, sit at our own tables, build our own, economy, because we control 80% of the purchasing power, and give each other business and only each other business. And when there's a pipeline of men who understand that, or whoever else is not, buying into it, because women also don't buy into it, then we will let them in. Right.
So
and
in
so
fact,
for me,
let's just 1 second,
yeah.
let's build on that, right? Because you
Yeah.
just said that there's sometimes that women don't understand that. So can you break it down just a little bit more? You've shared, right? But what was that like, helping other people be successful and then not getting credit for what it was that you were, for what it was that you were doing or being in those meetings?
Right. I mean, I don't know. I didn't get credit, but I definitely didn't get as much as the man sitting next to me. And I definitely didn't get the financial advantage of the man sitting next to me. And then, I'm an advocate by nature. I represented, people who didn't have the same education as me to advocate for them. Right. But that's fine. It's like, I couldn't do what they did. They can't do what I do. And it just became abundantly clear every time I represented a woman, the deal was much smaller. The conversation was much different than when I represented a man. So, frankly, it was depressing and, started to really weigh on my mental health. And I was just like, I can't continue to do this. I can't continue to, advocate for something. And then back, a little bit to the point about the other women, I would be like, this is crazy. I got an offer for a man, an entry level at 130,000, and I got an offer for his boss at 90. Why is this okay with anybody? And people would be like, I mean, what? They're okay with it. I'm like, but are they? Or are they just like brainwashed into thinking that it should be okay? And you know what? I just want to stay the only one in the room. So I'm just going to be quiet and I'm not going to be a troublemaker, right? Because we're community based and we like to problem solve. And so I was just like, I was like dumbfounded. And look, I'm from a single teenage welfare mom, right? No one had, advanced education other than me and my entire extended family. So I didn't know that women were prejudiced against in that way in the workplace. I had no clue. So I was shocked. And then the higher up I got, the numbers became bigger, and that could really change your wealth and your ability to be like F off and quit a job and to do something else. You know what I mean? That's really important because it's important for your choice. It's not for your happiness, but it's the choice for your family that you can make, right? That economic independence.
Absolutely. And being able to see it at that scale, right? Because,
Yeah.
what you offered was the 100,000 range, but I'm sure that you also saw that in the hundreds of thousands of dollars realm and millions in terms of
Millions,
the difference,
yes.
right? This is a contract that's in the millions for him. And then this is a very different contract for her. So Rachel, look, there's a lot of misogyny
on this part.
You could. There's a lot of misogyny in the industry that you come from. So
Yeah.
what's that experience been like? Has it gotten better?
Wow. So now I'm in private equity, which is
industries, right? Like, because you just spent time in these industries.
I don't know. I think I'm a glutton for punishment. So in tech, Jennifer, to your point, I was one of those women early in my career. I joined a startup. I joined 1 month later than my male peer, who was a product manager as well. And when we started talking, I found out he got 10 times more stock than I did. And we were in the same role. And then I found out later when I was leading a team.
I get goosebumps when I hear that stuff. I get so angry.
And that stock became worth a lot. We exited very successfully. Some people did it very well. And so, and later in my career, I joined a team at Google. I was leading a whole team regionally. And when I got into the role, I realized that one of the account executives who worked for me was being paid more than me. So of course I reset that. But if I hadn't fought, if I hadn't pushed, this would have been accepted. And there's no situation where that's acceptable. And then I could just go on and on. I mean, there's so many examples. I stepped forward to lead Google Africa, and they insisted on paying me local African wages, even though I have to maintain all of my household, in the Bay Area. I mean, the kinds of sacrifices that women make to get ahead personally, professionally, economically are staggering. And it's the price to pay to play. And that's literally what you see in private equity. You have a lot of emerging fund managers. Diversity is improving. But what you don't hear about is the dirty little secret that people who've been in private equity for a really long time, and this is also for VCs, when they're starting a new fund, they don't pay themselves. But if you've been in the business for decades, you've made a lot of money, it's no big deal. Now, if you're a first-time woman in VC, or private equity, and you don't get to pay yourself for many years, that is a completely different situation. And that is another structural barrier. This is just like startups. So I've had 4 startups, 2 of which I co-founded and led. And in all cases, but especially in the 2 that I co-founded, the attitude among VCs was, you're not committed unless you put in, the first, let's call it 500,000 in capital yourself, and you don't pay yourself until your next very large institutional round. And it was just assumed that you wouldn't pay yourself. And then I talked to male CEOs. There's no way they wouldn't pay themselves. So there was this very stark contrast in what's expected. And I call it women subsidizing the rich. And it's basically where our economic labor, yet again, is being used to subsidize broader sectors of the economy.
So I'm with you, JJ. It is infuriating to hear such stories, but they're the realities that so many women are experiencing. And alongside that, there are lots of young women who are coming up who are experiencing imposter syndrome, wondering whether they're qualified to be in the spaces that they occupy, failing to understand that sometimes they're far more qualified than the guys who are seated right next to them. And yet you find that there are women who are not being paid, not only what their male counterparts are making, but also being underpaid compared to the men who are reporting to them. So this raises many different questions about staying in the game, keeping skin in the game. And so I'd love for our listeners to hear a little bit more about your personal stories and about your own journeys and how you made it to the other side, to a space of thriving or doing exactly what Sandra says, which is to bring in that space of joyfulness. And I want to start with you, Patricia.
As I was thinking about this show today, I was thinking about my first time that I wanted to go out and buy a home, and I approached the bank that I had been, I'm 65, so this was years ago, but I approached the bank that I had been banking with since I was in college. And at the age of 39, I was about to buy my own home. So I'd been at this bank for almost 21 years. And I had started a new business, and my business actually had been in business for about 3 years at that point, and I was doing really, 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 really well. So I was going to buy a condo, and I had enough money actually in my savings account to actually buy the condo with cash, but I wanted to use financing for it. Long story short, this bank after sending me through all of the, the rigmarole, all the paperwork, and, I had to, show exactly where all of the finances were coming from, the the income from my businesses and all that. So I did all that. And everything seemed to be fine until the day that I had to personally show up to the bank. Well, first of all, the first time I went to the bank, I was interviewed by a person of color, and they were like, they looked at my paperwork and stuff, and they were like, great, 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 great. And everything was fine till we got to the last bit. And I decided, and went through all the channels and stuff. So 2 months later, we're in the process where I think I need to turn in an appraisal or something like that. And they assured me it was going to go through. And then I showed up at the bank in person to give them the appraisal. And then all of a sudden, they couldn't do my loan. And everybody was shocked. The people that I knew who were in bank, other people I knew who were in banking were kind of shocked. They're like, and then they told me, well, if you got enough money, we know you have enough money here to pay for it outright. Why don't you just take all your money out, pay for it outright, and then we will subsidize it based on, you have ownership of it. I was mortified, but it also, harkened back to stories of when my mom talked about, how difficult it was to get credit in her name, how difficult it was to get open up an account as a woman. So those are the kinds of things that I'd like to see change. And when I think about some of the women that I work with, where financial independence becomes critical in order for them to be able to leave situations that they find themselves in, if they're experiencing a violence or abuse or anything like that. So, we have a saying in the Black community, God bless the child who has her own. And it speaks to the need for financial independence, and at least provides one layer of protection for women and their children, that they're able to at least have some ability to create the lives and the futures that they want based on having some financial independence. I don't remember which one of I think it was maybe Jennifer or Rachel mentioned that we control 80% of the purse strings in the economy. But yet there are only, I think the last time I looked at mightydeposits.com, there's only 13 women-owned banks in the United States. And I think that we control less than, maybe out of the banking industry, I think the total deposits are about 1 billion altogether, which is tiny, 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 tiny. So that whole movement, the movement for financial independence, and how a women's economy can impact not only just do we get to survive ourselves,
but do we actually get to a space of actually being able to thrive as well?
Have a joyful life, right?
Right, the joyful life part. And so, Sandra, let me bring you in here, right, in terms of that joyful life part, but also breaking through barriers and a bit of your Genesis story as well. So was it always so fabulous, or did you have to break through as well?
It has not been fabulous. It has been incredulous. All of these years and more to come, I'm afraid. So I've been listening to our conversation and grateful for the candor, and the kindness, even, in the decision to share so openly. And it made me, though, want to take us a little bit deeper, because I would like for us
take us there.
I would like us to be able to talk about the differences of things that are going on because of how we are perceived in our society. You see, there's the concept of the difference between the intersectionality, that is gender and race. Gender and race. So my stories are going to be different from I just didn't get the promotion or the job salary I was supposed to get. I have to tell the stories of I wasn't supposed to be there at all.
Mm-hmm.
At all. I wasn't supposed to have power at all. I wasn't supposed to have voice at all. I wasn't supposed to have a point of view at all. And to talk about my own experiences amongst women, other women who are not Black, then I was perceived not really a team player amongst the women. And that has been continually to be the ongoing divide between women. Now,
so a kind of truth and reconciliation amongst women.
Thank you. A truth and reconciliation amongst women. We are not all the same. We should not be required to be all the same. in order to be able to be supportive of each other. But these assumptions that we are, and that there's one fix for all of us, is going to be the end of us. And time is passing. We have an opportunity here in the United States of America for a new government leadership. And we cannot continue to ask everybody to look back when and be restorative and talk about the loss. We've got to build bold new ideas of what a future will be. And what a future won't be anything that we have lived in the past. And so we cannot get there with our own old constructs. I am not a dark-skinned light woman. Okay, I really am not. And white women, as try as they might and will with their good hearts, will not get me. They don't need to get me. I need for them to get them. And I got me. And then together, we'll build something that is altogether new. The Black women's economic agenda talks about a new house where all of us can probably find a way forward and with our distinct needs. It is supported by a demand for economic security. It's supported by a demand for economic equality and equity. It is supported by a demand for economic access all the way up and through. We will not be underpaid or undercompensated ever anymore. Can't happen in this house. And it will have a pillar for joyful living, because that is how we know it is all well with us. These things matter. We are not in America as Black people poor. We are broke. We are broke. And if you continue to live in a state of broke, then it mimics not having the resources. And then they pronounce you poor, which simply means you have no access to where the wealth is, and you shouldn't expect any because you are poor at all. But at 1.4 trillion in Black buying power, we are broke because what we have to do is push the money away from us in order to get the resources instead of having it work amongst us. I'm very happy to hear that there is a venture capitalist, on board, because the League is doing something about us being perennially broke as Black people. We are creating an accelerator for Black women-owned businesses so that we can grow our micro businesses, of which we have many, to mid-sized enterprises, which would be 50 million and up in revenue. And we're going to get there by skipping over being small and go strictly to the growth and the vitality of merger and acquisition. So we're going to buy things bigger than ourselves to be bigger and be of a size that can actually contribute to the economies of our community. So we are thinking in a different kind of architecture for what we want our future to be.
Sandra, so what I'm hearing from you is that the future of a woman's economy must engage the differences that women bring to the table. What does an economy look like that's thriving for a woman who has disabilities? What is a woman's economy for a woman who's Indigenous and living on a reservation? What is a woman's economy when she's working very hard trying to put food on the table and she's at the lower economic rungs of society, but wants more for herself and for her family? And the fact that women have to be mindful and thoughtful about other women with multiple diverse backgrounds and agendas, and how do we help to lift up other women? And I'm also hearing that we need to think about how we build forward that, it wasn't intended that women would be able to vote. It wasn't intended that women would be able to own their own businesses. It wasn't intended that women of color should be able to even run for office or see themselves as citizens of this country. And we know, even just over the last few years, the dramatic circumstances that so many women who happen to be Latina, Latinx have had to experience in this country. So I want to turn to you, Rachel, because you ran for Congress. These are issues that were central and important for you. What's the advice going forward? We have a new administration coming into the White House in January. Kamala Harris as VP, Joe Biden as the president. What's the advice that you give to them and others who are listening, who are in Washington, D.C. or state capitals, about rebuilding a woman's economy? And I also want to hear from you also, Jennifer, on this question.
Well, this is an incoming administration that has already demonstrated a very sophisticated level of understanding about how to integrate social justice throughout all policies. And in addition to that, how to put climate really front and center in a lot of the economic opportunity that a recovery presents. And so when you look at the policy memos that have been released, you find, Build Back Better plan, et cetera, you find that there is a sense of intersectionality. There is a sense of climate justice. And I think that is foundational because we are dealing with multiple threats at once. And interestingly, the solutions to address those threats are common. What we have is an opportunity to invest in communities that have traditionally been disadvantaged with clean infrastructure. That improves water, that improves air quality, that improves power, clean power generation. That also means that communities that have been disproportionately affected with negative health outcomes as a result of, let's call it climate pollutants, particulate matter, et cetera, are the ones who would be most benefited. So what we need to do is double down on investing in areas that have been underinvested in. And to your point earlier, Sandra, about VC, during the last couple of years, VC investment in women has actually gone down. This is despite Time's Up. This is despite all the effort that's been made to have discussions about the need for equity and equal access to capital. But the practice has not improved. What you are seeing is the rise of emerging fund managers of greater diversity, and that's extremely exciting. And so the accelerator that you mentioned and some of the newer funds that have emerged that are focusing strictly on diversity, whether it's Black women entrepreneurs, or I have a number of friends who are starting VC funds that are focused on Asian entrepreneurs. And this is the kind of variety that we need because the level of intelligence and innovation that exists in the world is distributed. It's not in a rarefied group of men who all look alike. And we need to recognize that the businesses of the future and the ones that will really drive new opportunities in the economy are very much housed in the centers of wisdom that reside in communities who are frontline communities for many of the issues we're talking about.
So what I appreciate about this conversation is that it's an in-house conversation, though we're sharing it with hundreds of thousands of people. But it's a frank conversation about where women are and rebuilding America, thinking about building towards a woman's economy. And we would be remiss in a conversation about this for a failure during COVID to talk about women who are essential care workers, who are at the front lines. And so many of these women, while called essential, are not treated that way. They're treated as being fungible, dispensable, and these are things that we have to pay attention to. The women who happen to be at the front line, whether it's at the nursing homes, whether they're doctors, nurses, orderlies, or they happen to be working in the restaurants, they happen to be the people who are working at the grocery stores that bag the groceries or are the tellers. We can't have this conversation without thinking about them and keeping that front and center. And especially for folks, again, in the state houses and in Washington, D.C., to be paying attention to their needs and the needs of their families. It's some of these women whose children have to sit outside of a Taco Bell, a McDonald's, or whatever place that's sending a strong enough Wi-Fi signal so that their kids can actually get it and do their homework. I want to turn to you, JJ. And keeping that in mind, you even talked about coming from a family where you have single mom, teenage mom, and the first person in your family to break through certain barriers in terms of going to college. And then there have been other barriers that you've broken through, but you've also done something that many people would say is incredibly risky, being at the top of your game, having worked for Jay-Z, Beyonce, other folks, whatever, really managing at that high level, and then deciding to leave that and to start your own firm focused on women and, as you say, woke men. What leads you to do that? And what's your message to people who are afraid and who say, I could never do that. I'm not happy where I am. I'm not getting what I want, but that's just a bridge too far. That's just a risk that's too high.
Well, I left more because I had this unique education and in understanding business, business structures, business development strategy, as well as legal, helping build, businesses along the way that, helped create economies and, building cultures and in spaces that hadn't been built yet, right? So I had, again, though, you just heard how I was representing and advocating for a lot of women, and you're right, there was tens of thousands of dollars difference, and it got up to millions of dollars of difference. And, but I just realized that I was making money for the patriarchy, making money for men by day and trying to overthrow the patriarchy at night and trying to help women because it was a big source for me. I'm also on the board of this organization called Free From, a domestic violence organization that helps women not only get restitution, repairs their credit, and teaches women how to be entrepreneurs so they can get away from, their attackers and become survivors and thriving. So, I was like using all this time, I'm also a single mom of 7-year-old twins. And I was like, what I have all of this. I came from nothing. I have all of this knowledge. Like, what can I do? And I decided to take and do exactly what I was doing before, strategy, business development, management, legal, but do it solely for women and really help women, maximize their earning and their potential so they no longer have to look at a VC, who, when they're pitching their company and they're like, yeah, I don't really get it. Isn't there a lot of stuff for women's hair? And it's just like, okay, like, you don't get it. This is none of your business. Okay. Like, you're not the buying population. Just give us the money and shut up and I'll give you your return. Like, you know what I mean? It's just like, it's so patronizing, and to Sandra's point, it's just like, we're all women. And the great news is, we're 50% of the population, but we are still every race, religion, socioeconomic background, and sexual orientation, right? So we're not all the same. Not one thing fits all. And they would be like, oh, I was at a company that did live experiences. And it's like, okay, well, let's have this one thing for women. Well, aren't there a lot of things for women? No, there are not. Okay. There are not a lot of convening places for women experiential, but you guys have 20 different, sporting events to do on any given day, plus, golfing outings, et cetera. And so we're all lumped in. And so, like, my whole point is to give women economic freedom. And yes, I'm talking about a certain economic class of women who are usually negotiating big, employment deals or trying to get money in a female-founded company, and women who are individuals building out their brands themselves and building their own businesses. And the thought and the prayer, but there's research to back this up, is that women actually is the one place that trickle-down economics will work, and we then build our own matriarchal economy in society. So that is why I did it, and that's where it's like so I quit my job being a single mother of 7-year-old twins living in New York City, to represent, a population that at most makes 80% of what men make. And I'm virtually unemployable by a man ever again. So,
but it's
and
important, right?
So
Standing on integrity, right? That's the point of what you're trying to do and trying to build out for future generations of folks. So I want to turn to knowing our worth, right? Before we begin that point of wrapping up on our show, because I think that that's the struggle that's for a number of women. And it's also the struggle for a number of girls and teens too. How do you know your value? How do you know your worth? People toss around phrases like that. Don't do this because you're worth more than that. But these are really tough decisions that folks make sometimes, even when they know that they're not going to be paid what their male counterparts happen to be. But they think, but the job is here today, and I need to just jump in and take it. So is that the case? I'll open it up to any of you, right? Is it the case that you see an opportunity and you have to take it and you shouldn't push back? Or what's the advice that you give to somebody who's maybe interviewing for a new job and they want more?
All right. I want us to be more precise about how we think about what we're bringing to the table. The concept of my worth is I am priceless, incalculable. My worth is me. All right. But my talent on the marketplace is something that we can assign value to. We can assign value to, and we can know what that value is. The things that I do are this amount that I expect in exchange for what I choose to do. Now, once I do that, then I want to learn how to negotiate so that I go get what I want versus what they will give. And also there's a big difference between negotiating and what we do, which is take anything we can for peace, in the larger culture of some women. So we want
I
to
like
teach
how
our
you
daughters.
phrase that, right? Because women take what they're going to get for peace because they don't want to be disruptive. That's a good point. Help women understand why it is that they make some of the decisions that they
These
do.
are very different things, and we can get really good at this. We can get really, really good at this. And when we do, we're going to find out that we walk away from the table with more of the wealth that the table had to offer, which, by the way, is usually, particularly when we're talking about government, our wealth. When we talk about corporations whose products that we support, our wealth. And so we're going to our wealth in order to determine what parts of it will we be pulling to our own use. We are not taught how to negotiate. We must learn that. The sisters here on this broadcast have negotiated like demons for men's wealth and corporate wealth. There's no way you don't take that same skill to the table for your own wealth. And then maybe just this one other thing. The idea of what I am worth in the world is something that needs to be revisited totally. I'm not fungible. There's no replacement for me, not even my children are me. And when y'all know what that is, and I know what it is I bring in the years that I have to offer on the world, then it is entirely my power to determine what it is that I will put my hand to and put my time to and my heart to, and how that experience will be. And so if I'm in a situation that does not suit me, then the situation is not deserving of me. I make plans to leave.
In my field, you definitely have to be prepared to negotiate. And what there a number of studies have shown is that women do get penalized when they negotiate hard for their own compensation. In fact, when women fight for their value, generally, they get penalized. So there are a variety of strategies for doing it. One is to depersonalize it. And I like to use benchmarking data. So VCs report salary data. There are databases you can use to pull objective third-party data, which of course, if the majority of, the sector is male, then, those benchmarks are going to help you generally in your negotiation, because it'll probably be a lot more than what you would have had otherwise. So try and get outside data to validate your position and to bolster it. So it's not about you, it's just about, this is what the market value for this role is, and I deserve at least that. That's more of a tactical approach. It's not the beautiful vision that Sandra outlined, but it's something that is useful to know when you're going into something like this. I also think talking to people who have the kind of role that you want and that you aspire to, helping shape the way that you understand the value that you bring to the table, so that when you talk about it, you don't just express that you want this compensation, you express that you are the single best person for this role. And if they want you in that role, they better pay you what you're worth. And so it's a way of explaining how you bring a unique value that will really move that business or drive innovation, whatever it is. And then I think also just having, having a sense of passion about something isn't reason enough to take a lower wage. And I think that's probably what I hear most from women, especially women entrepreneurs. Well, I love this so much, I would do it for free, so I'll just take whatever they give me. And for me, it's like mind-boggling, because if you love it so much and you're so passionate and you have this unique approach that you bring to the table, then you should be paid even more, because your commitment level is so much higher and your ability to execute is so much better. So I would say flip that whole paradigm in your head. Yeah. You're not lucky to be at the table, they're lucky to have you. And if you bring passion and commitment, then they should be paying you more, because you're going to work on this, even in your spare time, because you'll always be thinking about it if it's something you're really passionate about.
To add to that, those are like tactical approaches, and those are great. And I always say, do your research, see what those benchmarks are. And, but back to, women often have a hard time negotiating for themselves, right? Even, Beyonce has Sasha Fierce when she gets out on stage that we all learned about, because we might not think we can't bring that bravado when it's faced in our face. And so what I always tell all of my female clients is to think about that thing that you love so much, right? So I think I take my kids, Jack and Nico. I'm like, okay, that's who I am negotiating for. I'm not negotiating for Jennifer Justice. I'm negotiating for them. I'm negotiating for their future. And I will do things that are illegal to protect them, right? And so if you do it and you have that passion and know that it's like an affront to you on the salary is an affront to them. And because every day I'm walking out the door or into another room nowadays to do work, is that it's time taken away from them. And so if you channel that and you're like, okay, and it gives you that ability and that kind of like bravado to ask for the things that you might feel that you might back down on, or, what, oh, I'll just, I just don't, I don't want to, I want to keep the peace, right? As Sandra has said. And so to do those things, and that helps you do that. And then the other thing is, I always say to always ask for 20% more, right? So always ask for 20% more, because that's that compounding interest, right? Compounding your value and your salary over the years. If they say they can't, right, then I think you're free to ask questions like, okay, well, when could I get this? All right, what are the other things that I can get? Because it's not just your salary, right? As Rachel said, there were options. There's some equity, there's perquisites, maybe there's childcare, maybe there's other things, but it's like, and then, and ultimately, if you have to take that job now and they've said no to you on everything, you also still have instinct, right? And if your instinct is like, you know what, this is probably not the right place for me, but you know what, I need the job, I'm going to take it right now. And you're already now on your way to the next job and thinking about where and moving toward the next place, as Sandra said.
Well, Michelle, I started out an orphan born in 1956. Lived in an orphanage for 2 years, then went into a foster family. It was a Catholic orphanage, and there weren't that many African-American families who were Catholic in Cleveland. And so they had to relax a little bit, the whole notion that I could only be adopted by somebody that was of Catholic religion. So they allowed my parents to take me in. And then so I didn't start off with a silver spoon by any stretch of the imagination. I was finally adopted at age 7. Was very fortunate that I went through, had a couple of people in my family who were very strongly supportive and at least encouraged me to pursue the things that I was interested in. I think my dad, more than anybody else, basically wanted me, he would always say, God bless the child who has her own. And he was the one that really, inculcated into me the notion that it was important to have financial independence, so that no matter how my life turned out, whether that I would be able to take care of myself and be able to take care of any children that I had. So, and that was an unusual upbringing to have, that my father was the one who really encouraged me to be financially independent and to pursue a career.
Well, I want to add a factoid in here before we move to the very last part of our time together today, because you're talking about building wealth. There's a broad level and spectrum of the conversation, right? When we think about how women have been impacted in an economy that spans this nation's history, and we could talk about it just focusing on COVID. We can look at how women have been hit across the board during COVID, with some women being hit far worse than others who are just trying to get on the ladder. But I recently just got a ding from a colleague in Boston who just wrote that in Boston, the median wealth for a white family is nearly $250,000. For a Black family, it is $8. The median wealth of a Dominican family, lots of Dominicans in the Boston area, is $0. I mean, for a lot of folks, that's just like hard to imagine. You just think that the numbers must be wrong. They must be missing some zeros there and adding some 2s and 3s and 4s and 5s. But in Boston, the median wealth for a white family is nearly $250,000. For a Black family, it's $8. The median wealth for a Dominican family is $0. So the point behind the conversation of women leading and a woman's economy in so many households are women-led or women-shared, then these are real issues that impact people's lives. So we get to this point in our show where we ask people about silver linings and how do we think about a silver lining in light of information that's like that. So let me start with you first, Sandra. What's the silver lining in these times? Is it, a new White House? Is it that there will be government shift? Is it that we're having conversations like this with platforms like we can lift up the voices of women and push out these issues? What are you seeing as silver linings?
A couple of things. I'm very excited about the new White House. We worked for it. Black women delivered the vote that created this opportunity. They know it, we know it. And we're pleased with what is becoming the outcome of it. Now, this is the work that we want this White House to do. We have elected them to be in service to us. We have, to your point about the gaps in wealth, we cannot have wealth when we just have jobs. We must have assets. We must own stuff. And so we want this White House to help us own our own communities, own our own businesses, own our own fortunes. And that is, by the way, the thing all the way from back to slavery was the last thing they give up, the idea that we could own stuff. We must own things. When you do things that you own, make money for you. And your situation is different. Just that.
There you go. JJ, what's the silver lining that you see ahead?
Like I think, again, the White House, but I think the silver lining is even though with COVID, women went back, women are tired of it, right? And we're acknowledging that it's our power and our worth can no longer be diminished. Our reproductive health, our wealth, WELLTH wealth is important. And I think that, as a group, we are acknowledging that and acknowledging our different voices and that we have to use our collective voices and help other women's voices rise up. I really don't think we're going backwards. And I think we became complacent for a while, but I just see that it's on the collective conscious of many people now. And I think that, this is just highlighted that we cannot go back any longer.
Thank you so much for that. Rachel.
In addition to the very exciting incoming administration, I would say that this has been a great reset. 2020 has questioned everything, our institutional structures. It has laid bare the structural deficiencies in our institutions. And for me, the silver lining is there are some things that don't need to be rebuilt. Let's build anew, and let's build from a woman's perspective, because it is more holistic and it is integrated. And if we do it right, it is intersectional. And I think there's a way to look at how we invest in our institutions and generate the economic opportunities of the future, doing so from a place of fairness and equity and justice. And this is where we don't have to shore up the failing rules and structures that were originally designed to disservice a large majority of the population. So let's keep in mind, just because something has fallen away and is no longer structurally sound doesn't mean it's our job to fix it. We've been fixing people's messes for a very long time. Let's go out with a clean slate and build fresh and build with an entirely different vision in mind.
So, Patricia, tell us what you see as the silver lining in these times.
I think I see more women who have been energized to come together and work together in ways that we have not seen before, and energized to come together in incredible diversity. That has been empowering to see that, and to feel the kindred sisterhood that is coming out of that. You see more women starting businesses, even in the midst of a pandemic, starting businesses. Women are problem solvers. And so they're starting businesses around the problems that they see and how do we monetize that and make a go of that. But they were also starting businesses at record rates even before the pandemic struck. I see more women engaged in the political process, way more women engaged in the political process than before, and winning those seats. Some of them, for example, in Illinois, Lauren Underwood, just a seat that had traditionally been a Republican-held seat. She won it and retained that seat despite having a challenger that had billions of dollars and funded his campaign largely. But because she ran on a message that said, I want to take care of the people in my district, and she did the reach out and meeting with people and talking to people and did the work of the campaign, we won her seat again. But we see more and more of that happening across the nation. And I think that's a good thing. I think that the more women that there are in elected offices, it's not just about who's at the head of the ticket, although that's important too, but just the fact that you see just a groundswell of women that are now in the public sphere and running for office and attaining and gaining those positions. Those are the silver linings that I see.
Guests and listeners, that's it for today's episode of On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin. I want to thank my guests, Sandra Finley, Dr. Patricia Jones-Blessman, Jennifer Justice, and Rachel Payne, for joining us and being part of this critical and insightful conversation. And to our listeners, I thank you for tuning in for the full story. We hope you join us again for our next episode, where we will be reporting, rebelling, and telling it like it is, with special guests tackling issues related to an extremely relevant issue. How does the U.S. rebuild global relationships? We'll be joined by Penelope Andrews, David Kay, Gregory Schaefer, and Lyric Thompson. It will be an episode you will not want to miss. For more information on what we discussed today, including issues of domestic violence and sexual violence, and where and how you might be able to get help for yourself, a loved one, a friend, or anybody else that you want to share this information with, then please head to msmagazine.com. If you believe, as we do, that women's voices matter, that equality for all persons cannot be delayed, and that rebuilding America, being unbought and unbossed, and reclaiming our time are important, then be sure to visit us at Apple Podcasts. Look for us at msmagazine.com for new content and special episode updates. Rate and subscribe to On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, and Stitcher. Let us know what you think about our show and support independent feminist media. This has been your host, Michelle Goodwin, reporting, rebelling, and telling it like it is. On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin is a Ms. Magazine joint production. Kathy Spiller and Michelle Goodwin are our executive producers. Our producers for this episode are Maddie Pont, Roxy Zoll, and Mariah Lindsay. The creative vision behind our work includes art and design by Brandy Phipps, editing by Will Alvarez and Marsh Allen, and music by Chris J. Lee. Stephanie Wilner provides executive assistance.